All right. Hello, Daniel. So, fun topic today. Always love talking about fake news. Um, but all joking aside, CNN should be the last mainstream news source people go to for unbiased news. So, for this debate, I think we shouldn't really get into the weeds of things like selective editing or things such as that, because every news organization does it. If there's something that's like a national news story, right? Maybe that's pretty fair to criticize. But for something like they only played this part of a clip where somebody got punched or something like that, every news organization does that. So that's I think that's rather irrelevant, especially in mainstream news. So mainstream news is the other thing that I think is important in this. We're not talking about Alex Jones talking about the lizard people, right? We're talking about some of the bigger news networks out there. So I'm going to list a few of the reasons that I think CNN is by far the worst of any of these news organizations. I'll pass it over to you and see what you have to say. So to start, CNN is known to directly have ties with the DNC, right? There was a massive scandal during the presidential election where I believe it was Jake Tapper and who else was it? It was Jake Tapper and Mike. No, not Jake. Anyway, I know Jake Tapper was one of them. And so during this, they sent emails to the DNC asking DNC, hey, what questions do you want us to ask Donald Trump tomorrow? Please tell us by 10:30 a.m. or something along those lines. It was a large scandal because they were specifically trying to rig an interview for the DNC to make Trump appear worse than he was. Another reason is their coverage of things like focus groups. And so I'm sure some other news organization does this, right? But a lot of it's because CNN is proven to do these things. So when you have something like it was the second presidential debate, right after it was over, they cut to a focus group, and live on air, they got caught telling the focus group what they wanted them to say on air about one of Trump's speech. And then the woman recites it word for word, not knowing that they were caught with what they were trying to do. And then lastly, I would quote how John Bonfield, who is the supervising producer of CNN, was caught on a hidden camera saying that they intentionally push certain Trump-Russia-related stories and other stories about Trump for views. And he even doubts the Russian story himself. Like, he doubts how legitimate it is himself. So when they're intentionally trying to push a fake message, and they are proven to also do these other scandalous things that other news organizations like MSNBC or Fox News aren't being proven to do. Therefore, in my mind, people should look to them last when they're trying to get unbiased news. And so I'll see what you have to say about that, and who's your horse in this race.
Well, the overall thing I would say is that people shouldn't be looking to mainstream news for unbiased.
I mean, that's fair. That's fair. That's absolutely fair.
None of the sources are going to be unbiased because all of them are necessarily biased toward their market. And all of your criticisms actually go into exactly that. They're biased toward their market. They have to find their market. So Fox News recognizes that its market is very right of center. Breitbart recognizes that their network is extreme right of center. You have CNN, which is left of center. You have MSNBC, which is far left of center. You have Huffington Post or Occupy Democrats, which is extreme left of center. It's the same sort of thing. The more unbiased sources you would want to look to would be groups like the BBC, which is moderate left, The Atlantic, moderate left, The Economist, moderate right, The Wall Street Journal, moderate right. All of them are going to have some level of slant, but each of them are going to, of those ones that I mentioned, those are the ones who are going to attempt more than any others to be unbiased and actually bring their, even if their perspective has a little bit of a slant, because everyone has a slant, it's still an attempt at fair reporting, which is why you look to those sorts of sources rather than mainstream, as it's called, news. But to respond to your specific points, you talk about how CNN had one time when Donna Brazile was leaked questions, but I believe it was her who specifically had done it and wasn't even supposed to have, and it was only one question. So it wasn't. You're acting like this is a much bigger deal than it actually was. It was one question that was offered to her that was going to be asked during a future debate. Which, I mean, yeah, you don't want that to happen, but it's not that big of a deal either way. one question in a debate, which she still was going to have to answer. Hillary was still going to have to answer it, so it's not like it changes anything. It was probably just like a sample of, oh, how are these questions going to be asked? Oh, okay, like that. I'll prepare an answer. That sort of thing. It doesn't change anything because Hillary still has to answer it. Then you talk about there was a focus group that was told what to say, and that John Bonfield had intentionally been pushing Trump-Russia stories, even if they aren't necessarily true. Well, my answer to both of these is ratings. The goal of any of these networks is ratings. That's why we shouldn't be looking to them for unbiased news. That's not the goal of these networks. They are specifically pandering to their market. Since CNN's market is left, not extreme left, but left, they are going to pander to the left. So it's not unusual that they would try and frame things in a way that panders to the left. You see the exact same thing from Fox or from Breitbart or from The Blaze or from any source on the right. It has nothing to do with CNN. It has to do with a mainstream network recognizes its goal is its market, and then they pander to that market. But the last thing I want to say is specifically to compare CNN to other networks. If we're going to be looking at mainstream networks, CNN is preferable to many of the other mainstream networks. The PolitiFact, which is the Pulitzer Prize-winning organization that analyzes the statements that have been made by each organization to try and find out whether or not they are true, half true, mostly false, or pants on fire lies, has analyzed these statements made by different networks. And they find that CNN has lied about 22% of the time. Fox News has lied about 58% of the time in the things that have been analyzed. And MSNBC has lied about 48% of the time. So what's interesting about those numbers is that you have the extreme left and the extreme right, both of whom have much higher numbers of out-and-out lies than CNN, which is more moderate left. So really, if you're looking for unbiased news, you want to look towards the less biased sources. And CNN is less biased than the far left, MSNBC, or the far right, Fox and Breitbart. So overall, CNN is not the worst place to get news. Whether you are on the right or on the left, it's not the worst.
Okay, so I'll respond to a few of your points. So first of all, I wasn't actually talking about the second debate questions that they leaked to her. What I was specifically talking to, it was Wolf Blitzer and Jake Tapper. They sent an email to the DNC saying, I'll actually read it to you. I have the quote pulled up here. Wolf Blitzer is interviewing Trump on Tuesday ahead of his foreign policy address on Wednesday. Please send me thoughts by 10:30 a.m. tomorrow. Sent to the DNC on April 25th, 2016. Okay, so that was the specific incident that I'm talking about, them directly sending an email to the DNC asking them if they want to ask Trump about specific questions. Okay, so that was the instance I was referring to. So next, you talk about ratings, and I agree. Smaller news organizations are far superior to the mainstream news, as we call it. But this is not the topic of debate, for one. But two, it's not normally what people see. You walk into your grandma's house, you walk into a gym, the first thing you're going to see is one of the mainstream news networks, right? And so that's why I think it's important to evaluate themselves, because I would agree with you that smaller news organizations that have a slant but not necessarily biased are superior. So now we have to look at, you talk about the PolitiFact, right? And so that was taken from a very small margin of people. I'm actually looking at the study they did right now with TV on CNN. And overall, it looks like there's only a few hundred votes in how people actually felt about it. And then things they fact checked, actually, I'm getting a different number of 28% of the time compared to Fox News' 33% of the time. And I can post that in the comment section here. But most of these that I look at, the quotes that they're pulling and saying factual or not true, they're rather irrelevant, the ones they're evaluating. Something like, I remember, looking in 1964 at CBO, and then they say, CBO didn't exist in 1964. Those are irrelevant in actually looking at news stories when they just take random quotes and put those and they test those, see if they're accurate or not, compared to actually how you get your news. And so I would argue that CNN does this on the largest scale compared to Fox News or MSNBC or some of the other larger media outlets. So the large cases that they tamper with to try and push their agenda are ridiculous. If you look at something like the Milwaukee riots of 2016, CNN showed a clip of a young black girl saying, "Don't bring violence and the ignorance here into my neighborhood." CNN said, "Oh, this was a call for peace and this is an excellent display." But then when you look at the full tape, she's over here saying, go to the suburbs and do this. And this is national news coverage of a large event this past year that they're intentionally tampering with. And I don't see that same extent displayed in things like Fox News and MSNBC on such a large level. And then, of course, you have the Trump dossier, right, where they go and they say that Michael Cohen went to Russia and that he flew to the Czech Republic. And at the exact same time they publish this story, he's at USC with his son. And then he shows his passport. He hasn't exited the country. Turns out they had the wrong Michael Cohen. And then they have to retract their entire story. But they are so fixated on getting the Trump stories because they think it's going to push, that they are openly willing to push fake news down your throat. And I think you don't see that same level of fixation from things like Fox News and MSNBC.
Okay, so the first thing you talked about was how you weren't talking about Donna Brazile as much as you were talking about a specific instance where the CNN anchors Wolf Blitzer and Jake Tapper had asked the DNC what questions they would want to ask to Trump, which I don't find that surprising or unusual at all. That sounds like you're trying to make a big issue out of something that isn't a big issue. I have no issue. In fact, Hannity has talked oftentimes about how he will ask for Trump's advice on things. And then he'll ask questions based on that. It's not unusual for someone to ask if they have an allegiance to one side. They say, hey, what would you want to know? So if Wolf Blitzer goes, hey, DNC, what should we ask Trump? Okay. If Hannity goes, hey, Trump, what should I ask Hillary Clinton? Okay. That's just them going for their allegiance. And I would argue that they shouldn't have that allegiance and that we shouldn't be listening to networks that have an allegiance to one side. But still, that has nothing to do with whether or not they're the most biased organizations out there. You talk about how you were specifically looking at mainstream news just because it's what's on the TV. Okay, well, among the mainstream sources, we're already knowing that they're going to be biased to some extent. So then it's just a question of, out of those sources that you're going to see on TV. By the way, I think One America News and Breitbart both have TV channels that would be considered mainstream because they're both on cable news. So both of those would be there. And Breitbart is rather obviously worse than CNN. It's hard to take Breitbart seriously. I don't know. I think MSNBC would be the closest thing on the left, but MSNBC is nowhere near as bad as Breitbart. And One America News as well. Both of these, their extreme slant is so transparent, it's even worse than what CNN or MSNBC would have. When you have such an extreme slant, it necessarily clouds the types of news that you are covering. So when you talk about news not being covered, well, Breitbart listeners have no clue what's going on in the world because all they know is the specific narrative that they've been fed. One America News only knows news from a conservative perspective. MSNBC, other than maybe Joe Scarborough, they will not be told anything other than a liberal perspective. CNN does get both perspectives. Even though it is slanted toward the left, they at least do get the overall story. In fact, there was a study that was done, which was trying to determine how much people would know. And let's see, who was it by? Business Insider did an analysis of how much people knew about domestic and foreign policy. And they found that people who were watching Fox News could only be expected to answer 1.04 domestic questions correctly, compared to 1.26 who would watch CNN. MSNBC was also lower than CNN. So basically what you have there is the fact that you can judge a organization by how its listeners, how its viewers are able to answer questions, whether or not they've been informed. It was Business Insider actually quoting a Farley Dickinson University study is what that was. And it found that Fox News listeners were far and away the worst out of the mainstream news, followed by MSNBC. CNN was doing much better than either of those groups. So there you have again the fact that CNN is not even remotely the worst because they're more moderate. There was also a study by Pew Research Center which decided to analyze the amount of trust that each network has. And so what they did was they polled consistently liberal people, mostly liberal people, mixed people, mostly conservative people and consistently conservative people to see what their opinion was of each of the networks. So you have groups like BuzzFeed, which is distrusted by every single one of those groups, whether on the right or the left. You have Rush Limbaugh, who is distrusted by everyone except the extreme, consistently conservatives. You have people like the Ed Schultz show on MSNBC, which was distrusted by everyone except the extreme liberals. And so you have a good analysis so you can see which sides are believing each. CNN was trusted by consistently liberal, mostly liberal, mixed, and was about equally trusted as distrusted among those who are mostly conservative, as opposed to MSNBC and Fox News, which had less trust among the far right or the far left than CNN did. So again, you have the fact that over and over, when you analyze these networks against each other, the far right networks are not as good, and the far left networks are not as good as CNN. You talk about how CNN is a larger scale. Well, just because it's a larger scale doesn't mean Fox News is on the same large scale. And I think this was supposed to be a response to just the PolitiFact. PolitiFact, I was only using that to illustrate the fact that more often than not, CNN is making more unbiased reporting than MSNBC or Fox. And even with the numbers you were looking at, it wasn't that way. But if you look at the current Fox file, mostly false, or pants on fire together are going to bring you to 60%. 60% of the statements made on Fox that PolitiFact has analyzed wound up being mostly false, as opposed to CNN, which, if you look at it, I think you were right that it was 28, or let me see where that was, 9, 14, and 4. So yeah, right around what you were saying. But still, CNN is about twice as good in terms of the things that they are analyzing. So you have much less bias there. The last thing you were talking about was the Trump dossier. Look, there's going to be mistakes that are made on every network, and especially they make mistakes to try and help their particular allegiance. That's just the way it is. We live in a capitalist society. We have news that is capitalist. It's driven by money. That's just how things are going to go. But when you ask the question of where people, if they're going to be going to these mainstream networks, which ones should they turn to? MSNBC and Fox are clearly worse. Breitbart even more so. Occupy Democrats, any of these groups that are far to the extreme, far worse places to get unbiased news than CNN, which is more centered.
Okay, so I just want to talk about Breitbart real quick. So first of all, I wouldn't consider Breitbart mainstream news. A similarweb.com and study that they did, it shows like basically how popular in your traffic. They're not even in the top 100 in the country. Compare that to CNN being in the top 20 in the country. They're not even in the top 150 in the country. They're actually 157 compared to CNN being the 20th most trafficked news website in the country. So there's a much bigger audience to CNN. That's what I think makes them, mainstream news. Not that they have a TV channel. Now, the Trump dossier, because you responded to that, and I think that's a very interesting topic. So not only is it just the Trump dossier, but it's other Trump-Russia-related stories, actually. I believe it was last year in 2016. CNN is currently, 2007, but CNN is currently facing a $100 million lawsuit because they accused Trump of meeting with a Russian billionaire just days before his inauguration. It was 3 reporters, I think it was, that lost their jobs because they reported this falsely. And when you put that on top of the Trump dossier, and you put that on top of, the executive producers saying that they're intentionally pushing these things down your throat because of their ratings, to me as a consumer, if I was having to decide which news outlet I would want to pick, I would want to pick the one that's not having these things being proven about them, that's not being proven to be, misrepresenting the Milwaukee riots, that's not being proven to come up with the fake hands up, don't shoot for Michael Brown and Ferguson that proved to be fake. For the one that wasn't proved, to be staging a fake Muslim protest in London. All these things are proven to be CNN's mishandling of their reach, their audience, and their ability to stage, these events. And you don't see that same kind of proven track record with things like Fox News and MSNBC to the same extent, in my opinion, in the research that I've done. When you look at Fox News and MSNBC, yeah, they have a bias. Yeah, they selectively edit some things. Obviously they're going to have a bias like we agreed on because they want higher ratings. But when you look at the actual events that CNN's tampering with, it's on such a much bigger scale. I don't see Fox News editing out, something from the Ferguson riots to make it seem like they're misrepresenting a message. I don't see Fox News putting a fake Russia claim on Donald Trump that's getting them sued for $100 million. I don't see them trying to accuse Trump's, or I guess Obama, because they are right leaning. I didn't see them accusing Obama's lawyers of leaving the country and colluding with Russia so much that they're facing a $100 million lawsuit for it. And when you look at the powers at work here, it's a little mind-boggling that CNN is able to, kind of get away with all this, and people don't actually credit them. Let's also talk about CNN thinking that they're above the law in a way. When WikiLeaks released Hillary Clinton's emails, CNN on air reported it was illegal for the public to view these leaked emails, and that anything that you are getting through us, is what they said on the air, because it is illegal to possess these emails yourself. So when you look at just how they're blatantly trying to misrepresent these large national cases, I think it's obvious that when they're proven to be doing such things, that they should be the last mainstream news source you go to for unbiased news. I'm not saying Fox News or MSNBC aren't guilty of these things, but as a consumer, you should look at what's proven. And that's why I believe CNN should be the last one you go to in this aspect.
You can look at what's proven. That's exactly why I'm giving you all these studies that have looked at the analysis of the statements that are made overall by these networks.
Okay, I have one question, actually. I just have one question. All right, so that study you brought up earlier, I forgot to respond to this, where you said that they took the conservatives, liberals, very liberals, somewhat conservative, moderate. Where did you get that study from? Just curious.
Let's see here. Where was that link at? There's a Business Insider article quoting a study by Pew Research Center.
Okay, so I'm looking at the study actually right here on my screen, and so when you look at the group they took, the sample group, it shows that they had significantly more moderates and liberals than they did conservatives. They didn't have 10%. It's actually under 5% of the people that they surveyed were very conservatives, where they had over 30% of the people be liberal. So it's clearly not an equal representation of every group. While I did survey all the groups, it's not an equal representation of all the groups when they're selecting their news source.
That doesn't mean anything, though, because
it does, right?
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't, because it was asking each of these groups, if you are consistently conservative, what do you think of this? If you are mostly conservative, what do you think of this? If you are mixed, what do you think? And just ask each of them. And okay, so they might have 50 in one group and 30 in another group. That doesn't change anything, because they're still going to get a percentage out of the people who ask it. It doesn't matter if there were more of them in one side than another, because it's just asking, what do you trust most? And the ones who were mostly conservative were really the swing votes, essentially, on CNN, because they thought CNN was about equally trusted and distrusted, as opposed to MSNBC, which they distrusted. So, I mean, it really is not hard to see this one, because it comes down to the statements that are being made by a network. And you have all these individual examples of CNN having problems. Sure, I'm not defending CNN. I don't love CNN. But it's kind of silly to say that when you're looking for unbiased news, you should intentionally choose the far left or the far right rather than the center left, because that's just not unbiased. If you're looking for something that is unbiased, you look for the thing that has the least amount of slant. We all know MSNBC and Fox both are intentionally saying they are going to help the far right, or not well, I don't know if Fox is saying they're going to help the far right, but Fox is going to help the right, and MSNBC is going to help the left. CNN will more often than not help the left, but they aren't explicitly left. They aren't as far left as MSNBC, which is why whenever PolitiFact analyzes these groups, they see that MSNBC makes more lies than CNN. They see that Fox makes more lies than CNN, because CNN has less of a reason to lie. It really is just about your personal bias. So that also comes back to that other study that I talked about, which was you can analyze whether or not you're benefiting by watching a network by the amount of knowledge you have about the world, about domestic policy, about foreign policy, which is why you see that viewers of CNN are more informed than viewers of Fox or viewers of MSNBC. And you talk about how there was one of the scandals you talked about was CNN had misreported on something, and then when it came out and was proved, 3 reporters lost their jobs. Okay, well that shows that they actually care. You see the same sort of thing with any network that is specifically trying to actually get to the proof. They actually do care about that. And the thing that I think that a lot of people don't understand is how news works. So yeah, there's going to be times when a individual within a network is going to try and stage, like they're trying to stage a protest, or they're trying to make something seem newsworthy because they are contractually obligated by their network to put something out. They have to have something. So rather than get in trouble with their boss, they think, oh, maybe I can get away with making it look like I got a story here. But then as soon as that gets found out, a good network fires the person who did that. So according to your own argument there, CNN would be a good network. And this isn't to say CNN is great. They're not. Again, I don't love CNN. I don't love any of the mainstream networks. But if you're asking for unbiased news, they are certainly preferable to the ones who are explicitly right or left.
Okay. So to start, you talk about the study and how the amount of people that they surveyed in the different groups is irrelevant. And I disagree. First of all, casting a wider net on your sample is going to give you a more accurate statistical study, right? That's just common when you're doing any type of, survey and whatnot. But even then, when you survey 8,728 consumers and less than 5% of them are actually conservatives, that clearly is going to give you a bias in how the survey is interpreted and how the survey is actually conducted, right? It's illogical to say that when you only survey 5% of the conservatives out of 8,278 people compared to 30% of liberals, 30% of those 8,728, it's going to give a different representation of the people. In here. But on to some of your other points, you said since CNN fired those 2 anchors, that means that they care, right? No, if they really cared, then they would be able to not publish fake news, right? I don't think it's fair to say that, oh, well, they're under pressure by their boss, so that they can be excused for, pushing these fake stories, pushing the Trump dossier, or pushing, a false Trump-Russia tie that didn't actually exist and then get sued for $100 million. You can't just say, well, their boss would get mad at them, right? Because their job is, to deliver news to the people. Like, honestly, they have to care about their ratings as well, but there has to be some level of realism in that they have to publish, they have an obligation to the people to publish news, right? And so I think them just firing these people that publish these false stories does not excuse them for these stories getting published and put on air anyway. These are not like things that you can just simply excuse by the firing of an individual, because they should have took the time to look into what was getting put on the air, what was getting said to the American people, and its authenticity. This has actually been a lot of a big problem recently with people that call CNN and they claim to be someone that they aren't, right? They claim to be some mayor or some, ambassador or somebody, an eyewitness to this. And they couldn't even double check to see that the name on the caller ID was different than the mayor of the city. That is outrageous that they can't even have somebody do a simple Google search to correct these things. So you talk about the test, and you brought this up again, the test where they asked people, I think it was domestic issues you said, and CNN was 1.24 questions compared to Fox News' 1.06, sorry. And this is such a small margin of questions they're going to answer, right? That clearly falls within the margin of error, right? I don't know how many questions were asked, but that seems relatively small on a basis for a sample for there to be like a 0.2 difference in the amount of questions on average these people could answer in this data set. If you find more about that, I'm very interested to hear it, though. I think it is very interesting. So once again, you talk about Sean Hannity and how, he was caught asking Trump for questions or something along those lines. First of all, he denies that, and it was never proven. So over somebody that denies a claim and no one is able to prove it, I would select them over a proved source that is committing these heinous acts of trying to deliberately mislead the public and deliberately rig an election for Hillary Rodham Clinton, right? Because they're emailing the DNC. I don't see any leak or any proof that anyone at Fox News ever emailed the RNC asking, can we ask Hillary Clinton these specific questions please send us questions to ask Hillary Clinton. I can't find it. And I did look for it, actually, both before we did this debate and currently. And I still can't find any connections. Same with MSNBC, right? Even MSNBC calls CNN fake news. Now, I know they're competitors, but if they're calling a story that CNN is pushing fake news, like they did with the Trump dossier, like they did with this Trump-Russian scandal before his inauguration, that means that they are obviously dividing themselves from the views of CNN, which if they were radical left-wing, they would want to be aligning with that to attack Trump. And so I think when you take CNN and what they have done and the recklessness they have displayed and how they push these news stories to the American people, I don't think it's even comparable to what Fox News and MSNBC have done.
So, would you agree that MSNBC is explicitly left and CNN is mostly left?
I feel like MSNBC actually has a larger diversity. I think it depends a lot about like who you're listening to, but I think as an organization, CNN is probably more left than MSNBC. I think MSNBC, like Rachel Maddow, are more left personally than maybe somebody like Wolf Blitzer or Anderson Cooper. But I think as an organization, CNN is more left than MSNBC. Absolutely.
So the faces of CNN, the ones we actually hear, are going to be Wolf Blitzer and Jake Tapper and Anderson Cooper and Chris Cuomo, all of whom are relatively moderate with a little bit of a leaning to the left, as opposed to the faces of MSNBC, who are going to be Rachel Maddow and Chris Matthews and glasses, the really like hipster looking, I don't know, super left. These guys who are clearly far left. I will agree with you. There is a little bit of diversity in that they also have Morning Joe, who is a former Republican congressman, and yet Republicans don't really like him. Even so, the faces of MSNBC are far to the left of the faces to CNN. So I don't really see how you can say that. So if you're looking for unbiased news, you don't go to the place that is saying, hey, here's your liberal news, as opposed to the group. And the thing is, I would agree with you that CNN isn't doing as good of a job as they should be at providing the unbiased news they claim they're giving, because they're not really. They do have a slant to the left, but they aren't. MSNBC is explicitly saying, here's your news from a left perspective. And Fox is explicitly saying, here's your news from a right perspective. You talk about how there's sources that are proved deliberately to be helping. On a couple of issues, sure. In the same way that Hannity has explicitly tried to help Trump at every turn. But Hannity specifically had Trump Jr. come on his show to give him a cupcake of an interview after Trump Jr.'s idiotic actions. Sorry, that is exactly the same sort of issue. And sure, maybe we don't have Fox News feeding interview questions, but they find other ways to do the same exact thing. It doesn't matter. It's just the fact that they have their own biases, just like CNN has their own biases, and MSNBC has their own biases, and Breitbart has their own biases. Everybody has their biases. The only way to determine where you should go, preferably you wouldn't go to any of them, but if you are going to one of them, CNN is probably better than any of those other ones that are mentioned. That is mostly because of the fact that you can actually get some good information out of CNN. And yes, you talk about all these individual times when they've had awful things. As PolitiFact I talked about, they've looked into a lot of those times when people have lied. They'll make claims and they're flat out lies. 22% of the time, you're going to see CNN have lies. Okay. Actually, you said that I got that number from a 2014 article. So and when I looked at the current numbers, you're right. I think it's a little higher. It's 28%. 28% of the time, CNN is going to lie to you. 60% of the time, that the far out statements that have been researched by PolitiFact say that 60% of the time, Fox News is going to lie to you, and 48% of the time, MSNBC is going to lie to you. Why? Because more often than not, they will have a reason to twist the truth, because that suits their right biases or their left biases. This is also why, and you said it's an insignificant number on that other study I cited about people knowing things based on the network they watch. Even if it's an insignificant number, the fact of the matter is the study does show that you learn more when you watch CNN than you do by watching MSNBC or Fox. There's simply no comparison here. When you do an overall analysis of these multiple networks, you see multiple different ways in which CNN easily comes out on top of them. Not that CNN is great, they're not. But none of them are. And CNN is not the last place where people should go, because Fox and MSNBC are definitely worse.
Okay. So, all right, so to a few of those points. So first of all, you talk about Rachel Maddow and MSNBC. Look at your liberal news, right? So Rachel Maddow is obviously super liberal. I can't say with a straight face that she's not. But you don't have Rachel Maddow emailing the DNC asking for questions to interview Donald Trump. You compared that to Fox News and Sean Hannity having on Trump Jr. and giving him a nice interview. That's still not on the same level as emailing the DNC. This is a vast problem. If they were emailing Hillary Clinton, do you think that CNN would have, messaged Donald Trump and asked what questions he wanted to have asked? Of course not, because they have a very biased opinion and they're proven to have bias. Just as Fox News, but Fox News isn't taking it to the same step or level that you see on CNN. Now, back to PolitiFact, because we keep talking about this and how they mostly true or not true. So when PolitiFact looks at these statements that are said and evaluates how true they are literally taking everything said on the network. This is mainly talking about political bias, right? So when they examine something like Elton John saying HIV/AIDS is dramatically on the rise in the South, and they evaluate that, that's somewhat irrelevant. And CNN's filled with crap like that, talking about HBO or talking about Jesus was an undocumented immigrant, stuff. That's what PolitiFact is evaluating, not whether or not the news story CNN is pushing have a right or a left-wing balance. So when you're looking for unbiased news, I think that's somewhat irrelevant in the majority of the PolitiFact's data. Now, once again, you brought up the study and how I really want the specifics on the study, because either if they ask you 5 questions and you can only answer 1.6 versus 1.24, that is much more significant compared to if they ask you several questions or if it was a large group or a small group. Because the way the information was displayed to me when you first brought that up, 1.6 to 1.24, that is relatively small and is also within the margin of error for a study such as that. When people are only able to answer the one question and some are able to answer slightly more, that's clearly within the margin of error for a study such as that. So I'm gonna bring this back a bit. So when you have CNN, and I keep talking about how proven biased news, right? That's what I think this comes down to. If this comes down to when you are dumped into America and you just immigrated to this country, which source do you pick for your news when looking at the data presented to you? Now, maybe Fox is a right-leaning and they've done some shady things like CNN. Maybe MSNBC's done some of the things that CNN's done. But you don't have the blatant, overwhelming evidence on these large-scale cases in America and abroad in London, like with the London Muslim protests, that CNN has. You don't have Fox News saying that, somebody said hands up, don't shoot before they were shot by police, which turned out to be blatantly false and caused a lot of violence and riots. You don't have Fox News saying, we have proof that Hillary Clinton's lawyers went to Russia and colluded with Russians. You don't have Fox News saying Hillary Clinton had a Russian billionaire visit her a few days before and now we're facing a $100 million lawsuit. The amount of evidence towards CNN having such a strong bias and reckless in the way that they deliver news to the American people is overwhelming. Now, maybe they educate people slightly more on domestic issues than Fox. That's par for the course, good for them. But the way that CNN handles their information is so biased and so reckless that there is no justifying their actions towards how they send out their biased news to the American people. When I watch an interview of somebody like Donald Trump, I want him to be asked and for him to receive questions that CNN thought of and that they thought would be informative to the American people, not questions that first went through Hillary Rodham Clinton and the DNC to further their advantage in the race. And there's no proof of Fox News or MSNBC doing such things in this election or recently. So I don't think it's fair to put them on such a more outrageous level than somebody like CNN.
It doesn't change anything that you ask someone, hey, what question should I ask them? I could very easily ask one of my liberal friends, hey, I have this opportunity to interview Ted Cruz next week. What should I ask him? It doesn't change anything. I'll just ask the questions my liberal friend wants me to ask, and then I'll ask them in the way I want to ask them. This is not even remotely an issue like you're pretending it is. But either way, look, even if it was, even if this was a big thing, okay, there's going to be these sorts of things on any network. They're going to try and use their allegiances. They're going to try and use their contacts to try and get the best ratings. And CNN knows they have a liberal audience, so they want to know, hey, liberals, what sort of questions would you want to ask Donald Trump, who we're going to be interviewing next week? Who's the best source I can go to find out what liberals would want to know? Oh, how about the DNC? Really not surprising at all. It just has to do with them marketing to their network, to their audience. The study that I had talked about with learning about news based on where you were watching. It's from Farley Dickinson University, and I was reading through it. There's actually 2 studies that they did in 2012 and 2011, and they one of them was a phone survey, which was 6 questions, and then another one was 8 more questions. And between both of them, they found the same sort of thing, which was that Fox News viewers were consistently worse in terms of knowing the things that were going on in the world than any of the others. And they also had the same thing with MSNBC, which was lower. And they found that the ones who knew the most were NPR viewers, followed by, surprisingly, the Daily Show viewers. This was back in 2012 when Jon Stewart was there. And so it's about this whole idea of what are you being exposed to? And is it giving you the knowledge you need to know? And that Fox News was getting far worse because they were simply going for their specific biases. And CNN was kind of in the middle between all that group. Because of course they are. Because CNN politically is also more in the middle. And they are left, and they seem to have a specific allegiance to the Clintons, which is why they've been called the Clinton News Network, which I definitely see that. I saw them being much more unbiased during the Bush years than during the Obama years and during Hillary Clinton's election, because they do have more of an allegiance towards sort of the central left. But when we talk about the overall question here, you just have to ask the numbers. We know that all these networks are going to lie. We know that all of these networks are going to try and help the right or the left. They're going to, because it's going to be what markets to their audience. So how often is it happening? And the closest numbers we have are the PolitiFact numbers, which was that CNN does it about 28% of the time, which, I mean, give or take, it's probably a few more or a few less. It's somewhere around there, as opposed to Fox, which is doing it about 60% of the time, and MSNBC, which is doing it about 50% of the time. Why are both of those numbers higher than CNN's numbers? Because of their audience. It really is quite simple. If you want unbiased news, you go to the source that is trying to give unbiased news. Even if they're packaging it in a way that tries to appeal to liberals, they're still better than the ones who are explicitly saying, hey, I'm right, hey, I'm left. Because of that, it's rather obvious that CNN is not the worst of these sources. They have some problems, but they're not the worst.
Okay. So a few things to start. I don't think we have that much time enough. Yeah, like 2 minutes. So to start, you talk about how the emails are irrelevant that they did this. Okay, so when you have a supposedly unbiased, they said the most trusted name in news, first of all, is their slogan, right? You take that and you email on 2 different occasions. They have been caught emailing to the DNC to get questions for Donald Trump's interview. That's a problem to me personally. Maybe not to you, but even if you think there's no moral problem with that, you still can't say that it's not, biased towards Hillary Clinton, right? And that's not significantly biased towards Hillary Clinton. And you don't see that in MSNBC or Fox News. There's no proof of them saying, Donald Trump, what questions would you like us to ask Hillary Clinton? Or, hey, Bernie Sanders, what questions would you like us to ask Hillary Clinton on MSNBC? You don't see that, and it's not proven, and therefore the proof has to speak for itself. Once again, PolitiFact. PolitiFact is not a good source for how biased news is. PolitiFact is taking crap that Bill Gates says in an interview and weighing it for whether or not it's true or false and putting that towards its data. It takes, Elton John saying something about AIDS, and that gets put into its data. It's not a good representation of how biased your news network is. And then, we only have a few seconds. I'll give you the last 30 or so. But it just comes down to CNN on these large-scale news stories has been caught recklessly mishandling their news, and is proven absolutely proven through WikiLeaks and other organizations to have such a large bias towards the Clintons and towards the Democrats that is not shown in Fox News or MSNBC. And so with that, I'll give you the last few seconds.
Pretty much any study you look at is going to say that MSNBC is further to the left than CNN, because of course they are. They explicitly say they are. So of course they are. And pretty much any source is going to tell you that Fox News is more to the right than CNN. If you're looking for unbiased news, you don't go to the places that explicitly say, "Hey, we're going to give you biased news." They know they're giving you biased news. CNN isn't great, still better than the ones clearly biased.